Can you imagine a time when women had such power that foreign ambassadors would have to see them before they see the sultans? The Ottoman Empire had a long and glorious history. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that there are various elements to its grand narrative that are absolutely stunning. Perhaps one of the most interesting chapters of Ottoman history is commonly referred to as the Sultanate of Women, a period that extends for roughly 150 years at the height of the Ottoman Empire's reach, whereby female members of the imperial household held a tremendous amount of influence over social and political affairs. Ever since the inception of the Ottoman dynasty in 1299, female members of the imperial family had played a role in the running of the state. This is not so much a technical point as much as it is a common sense one. As well as being intimate companions, a woman would ultimately provide the empire with its future ruler. But prior to the 1530s, women were largely excluded from state building and policy making. Aside from their interpersonal relations to the Sultan, females could exert their influence over a prince who was expected to leave the capital so he could govern a region once he came of age, because they'd be followed by their mother, who was supposed to serve in a non-official advisory role. Women were also influential in the harem. What was the harem? Well, it's an Arabic term that means a sacred, inviolable place, but it is most commonly used for the part of the house that is reserved for females. We have to remember that the separation between male and female is much more stringent in Muslim societies than what we see in Europe. So the imperial harem was the place which housed the female members of the Ottoman dynasty. Within it, there was a hierarchy which placed the sultan's mother at the top, followed by the sultan's wife. So when did the so-called Sultanate of Women begin? Well, it all started with this lady, the Hurrem Sultan. Originally Ukrainian or Polish in ethnicity, she entered the Ottoman harem after she was kidnapped during a Tatar slave raid. In Constantinople, she was given as a gift to the future Sultan Suleiman by his mother Hafsa Sultan. An influential lady in her own right, Hafsa Sultan's authority was confirmed when she was made the first Valide Sultan, a position reserved for mothers of the Sultan. It would go on to become the most important position for a woman in the empire. The Ottomans, like many other Muslim dynasties, placed a lot of emphasis on the role of the mother. This can be largely attributed to the influence of Islamic teachings, which puts a great deal of value on the role of the mother in general. There's even the hadith which says, "Paradise is at the feet of the mother." The second most important official title for a woman was also created in the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Hurrem Sultan would go on to become the first Haseki Sultan, or the chief consort, in 1534. Their marriage ceremony was a spectacular event. Sultan Suleiman was absolutely besotted with the Hurrem. He wrote poems for her. Some citizens of his realm believed Suleiman was under a spell put on him by the Hurrem, who possessed witch-like qualities. In reality, it was the Hurrem's personality that had bewitched the greatest Ottoman Sultan. It's not too hard to see why either. Hurrem has been repeatedly complimented by contemporary sources for her intelligence, but also for her playfulness, which makes sense considering her name Hurrem means the cheerful one in Persian. During her lifetime, the imperial harem was moved into Topkapi Palace, the official residence of the Sultan and the headquarters of the Sublime Porte, or the Ottoman government. In Christian Europe, Topkapi Palace was also known as the Seraglio, a term which referred more specifically to the imperial harem as well. The sheer proximity to the headquarters of government policy making obviously meant that the imperial harem could now play an even greater role. In matters of policy making, Hurrem Sultan aided her husband. This was especially the case in foreign policy, where she even communicated directly with foreign leaders such as the King of Poland. Hurrem would also set a precedent for future Ottoman queens in her commitment to charity works. She built several hospitals, madrasas, mosques, and even soup kitchens to feed the poor. These projects were essential for displaying the soft power of the Ottoman dynasty. As well as needing a dynasty that had the virility to sustain itself through military force, ordinary citizens would have wanted generous and dedicated rulers who understood their needs. For the amount of power she possessed, it's no surprise that she had numerous enemies. Hurrem has long been accused of involvement in the eventual downfall of a number of key Ottoman officials. Most notable amongst these were Parjali Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier, and Shehzadeh Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son, whose mother was another consort of Suleiman's. Mustafa was seen as the most likely candidate for the next Ottoman Sultan, a development which Hurrem would have wanted to avoid at all costs, especially since the fratricidal customs of the Ottomans dictated that the Sultan should murder all of his brothers upon coming on the throne, in order to ensure that there were no civil wars. This would have meant Hurrem would have her sons murdered. So it certainly makes sense if she did work to bring Mustafa down. But all of this is speculation. There is no definitive link between the Hurrem and the executions of Parjali Ibrahim Pasha or Mustafa. Despite the tremendous power she wielded, there are certain misconceptions about the Hurrem Sultan's impact. For instance, it is commonly stated that the Ottoman Sultans were not allowed to have a wife until Suleiman married Hurrem. This is not true. Many of the early sultans had wives in addition to the concubines that they also had. There's also another myth, that the sultans' consorts would only be able to give birth to one son each, and Hurrem Sultan broke this tradition. This is also not true. When Hurrem died in 1558, the next dominant feminine presence at the Ottoman court would have been her daughter Mihrimah. Even though she was neither the Valide Sultan nor the Haseki Sultan, Mihrimah served as her father Sultan Suleiman's and brother Sultan Selim II's trusted advisor. Then we have Nurbanu, the wife of Sultan Selim II and the mother of Sultan Murad III. It is said that state affairs were more or less split amongst her and the powerful Grand Vizier Sukolu Mehmed Pasha during the 1570s. Safia Sultan was next in line to exercise power. As wife of Sultan Murad III and the mother of Sultan Mehmed III, and even as grandmother of Sultan Ahmed I and Mustafa I. After her came a woman whose power would rival the Hurrem Sultans. Kosem Sultan, the wife of Sultan Ahmed I, would go on to have a key role in a particularly difficult time for Ottoman leadership. Most likely of Greek origins, she was sold into the Ottoman Imperial harem as a slave, where she served as a Haseki Sultan for Ahmed I, who was apparently especially fond of Kosem. So much so that she was considered a key advisor of his. With no Valide Sultan due to the Sultan's mother dying early on, Kosem was the preeminent female in the Imperial harem of Ahmed I. When her husband died in 1617, Kosem sat on the wings for the next 6 years until her son Murad IV became Sultan in 1623. Because Murad was a minor at the time, Kosem not only became the Valide Sultan but also the official regent for her infant son. For the next 9 years, Kosem more or less ran the empire. In 1640, Murad IV would die, and his brother Ibrahim I began his reign under the watchful eye of his mother, Kosem. Later thought of as mad, Ibrahim spent much of his time in the harem, whilst his mother took care of state affairs. His character was erratic enough to make Donald Trump look like a seasoned diplomat. Sorry, Donald. But the dynasty had no other option. He was the only male candidate. Over the next few years, Ibrahim bore several sons. In 1647, Ibrahim and his mother Kosem had an acrimonious split, which resulted in Kosem leaving the imperial palace. The next year, Kosem, the Grand Vizier, and the Shaykh al-Islam, the highest religious figure in the empire, plotted to remove the mentally unstable Sultan. Kosem even gave her consent to execute her own son Ibrahim. From 1648 to 1651, Kosem even went on to serve as the official regent for her grandson Mehmed IV, even though the Sultan's mother Turhan had greater rights as the Valide Sultan. Well, it turns out that Turhan would represent a significant challenge to Kosem's power. Intrigues in the Imperial harem were nothing new, and so it was that Kosem finally found herself outsmarted when she was murdered. Most fingers have been pointed at Turhan, who now became the dominant female presence in the dynasty. Turhan continued Kosem and Hurrem's policy of using soft power through charity and building projects to appeal to the public's hearts and minds. But Turhan would be the last figure in the Sultanate of Women. The lack of strong central leadership, the rise of political intrigues in the harem, along with the discontentment of the powerful army corps, the Janissaries, the rise of economic turmoil, and almost continuous warfare meant that the first half of the 17th century was a very chaotic time for the Ottoman Empire. This is not to mention the instability brought about by mentally ill or underage sultans. In 1656, the new Grand Vizier, Koprolu Mehmet Pasha, accepted his position on the condition that he should have greater powers than his predecessors. In order to placate him, Turhan transferred much of her own powers to the Grand Vizier and renounced her position as regent. The Ottoman Empire would go on to stabilize under the stewardship of the Koprolu family that provided generations of Grand Viziers. Turhan would retain some of her influence since she stayed on as a Valide Sultan until her death in 1683. Interestingly enough, that's the same year as the fateful Siege of Vienna, which is supposed to mark the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Thanks for tuning in. This video was a part of Project Her Story, a history YouTuber collaboration aimed at highlighting the role of epic women throughout history. I have put the link to the entire playlist in the bio and comments section, but I want you to specifically check out the Jack Meister's video on Genghis Khan's mother, Hoelun, as well as Lindsay Holliday's video on the 17th century Queen of Sweden, Christina. Also, massive thank you to the Hikmah History Patrons for your continued support. I appreciate that. Until next time, peace!